We began to arrive in Britain in large numbers in the mid-1950s. The places we came from were stagnating economically after years of colonial exploitation. The Caribbean, India, Pakistan. We were waiting there, in a sense, like a massive pool of labor with a history of having to move in order to work.
In 1954, about 10,000 West Indians came to Britain. In 1955, it is believed another 15,000 will make the long journey. Already their coming has caused a national controversy, but one point must always be borne in mind. Whatever our feelings, we cannot deny them entry, for all are British citizens and, as such, are entitled to the identical rights of any member of the empire.
In fact, we were invited to Britain to do certain jobs. On the buses and the underground, in the sweatshops, in the foundries, in the hospitals. We did the dirty jobs, the uncomfortable jobs, for low pay. And we met racism. The riots in Notting Hill Gate in 1958 were evidence of this. But more than that, the economy was going into deeper and deeper recession. Unemployment was rising. The working people were getting restive. Among other things, the state reached for the weapon of racism. And by 1962, the first in a series of immigration acts was passed. Now, from that point on, a new pattern was set in British politics.
Again here, the ill feeling, of course, was spawned as a result of this act in which West Indians felt that they had now become second-class citizens. The open-door policy had been reversed. What is important to recognize now, it's not so much they're feeling directed against the act as such, because they're responsible, the act is law, they're fighting to repeal it, but the consequences of the act, namely the fact that the population at large, because of the whole propaganda against the West Indians, regard them as second-class citizens, and they themselves, on the job, in virtually every sphere of life, find this difficulty since the Immigration Act in terms of discrimination, color bar housing, etc., etc.
The issue of immigration and immigrants came to be used quite deliberately by the state, whipping up racism and confusing the working class. So that despite the fact that immigration has been effectively stopped, and despite the fact that we've proved our worth to the economy, we are still the target of a very mischievous and hypocritical debate about our presence here, our right to be here.
The picture is not that of a province or corner of a country occupied by a distinct and growing population, though that would be perilous enough. The picture is of the occupation more and more intense of key areas, and it may be added of key functions, in the heartlands of the kingdom.
And I think it means that people are really rather afraid that this country might be rather swamped by people with a different culture. And you know, the British character has done so much for democracy, for law, and done so much throughout the world, that if there's any fear that it might be swamped, people are going to react and be rather hostile to those coming in.
We will fight you back, and we'll fight you with every bone, every nerve, every feeling, every ounce of blood we've got. We will have our country back!
There can't be any doubt that in many areas we have reach the absorptive capacity in respect of new immigrants. The load on our educational system, to say nothing of housing, health and welfare, is such that the strictest control is now necessary, and this is true irrespective of where the immigrants might come from. This would be true if they were coming from...
Looked at in terms of the history of race and immigration in this country, it says one thing to me. It says that what Enoch Powell says today, the Conservative Party says tomorrow, and the Labour Party legislates on the day after, with slight modifications.
I don't believe there is any person in this room who could be sincere that the Labour Party would be a vehicle for our freedom. I have observed one thing about politics in Britain in regard to blacks. The Labour Party, because it says it's working class and because we are working class, can't do certain things. They get the Tories to do it and then follow them afterwards.
The political parties in Britain today are closing ranks not only against blacks, but against the entire working class. They have to, because they face a working class that's refusing more and more to pay for their mistakes in the form of chronic unemployment, rising prices, cutbacks in social services. In other words, a working class that is suffering a real decline in its living standards.
Afternoon. Factory after factory, post after post, mine after mine, pit after pit.
At one level, the state has moved to control all forms of resistance. There's been state control of wages, limitations on the right to strike. At another level, we've seen politicians stepping up the use of racism to break up that resistance. Now, the crudest extension of this policy is seen in the rise of the fascist party, the National Front, which spreads racist ideas, suggesting that the 2 million Asians and Afro-Caribbeans who worked here and are now settled here are responsible for the deepening crisis of the economy. In fact, blacks are under attack not only as a part of the very bottom layer of the working class, because that's still where we are, massively represented after 20 to 25 years in this country. But we're also attacked in our communities. So it's not surprising, out of this dual oppression of class and race, that blacks are among the leading elements mobilizing in the working class against the government, against the state itself.